I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk about the India-UK Fellowship, which we have set up with the Jaipur BookMark, and then we will hear a bit more from our fellows from this year's selection. Is that all right now? Yeah. As you just heard, this is a fellowship which is in its second year, and it has become a very vital part of our relationship with the Jaipur BookMark and the Jaipur Literature Festival, which actually aligns very well with some of the recent agreements, including the program of cultural cooperation and the free trade agreement, which was signed between the two governments from India and UK. Literature and publishing is a very strategic pillar under those four agreements. And having said that, the relationship between the India and UK publishing sector, especially with the independent publishing, is one which has been there for a very, very long time. And the fellowship that we run with the Jaipur BookMark only reiterates British Council's belief in independent publishing. Indies, as we all know, have long been the heartbeat of the industry. They're agile, innovative, and absolutely essential for bringing new and diverse voices to the forefront. Like Manisha and I were just talking the other day, and what she said stuck with me, where she said indies are like people stirring a pot which is boiling with ideas. And I really thought that this kind of resonates, or rather, captures the essence of why we are supporting this particular initiative. Building on the success of our inaugural fellows, Isabel Kenyon of Fly on the Wall Press and Vasundhara of Chanda Pustaka, whose journeys have truly set the standards of what this program has to offer. We are very delighted this year to welcome our fellows, Harriet Hirshman from Dead Ink Books from Liverpool, and Ruby Hembrom of Adivaani Books from Kolkata. The fellowship is designed to offer a unique platform for independent publishers from India and UK to, through a comprehensive program to focus on professional development, networking opportunities, and giving them an opportunity to participate in the JLF and also the London Book Fair. This fellowship aims to foster meaningful cross-cultural dialogue, strengthen professional ties between India and the UK, and also help create new markets for remarkable writing and translations. We hope that the seeds that we have sown in the present will nurture and inform the future of the people-to-people links between our two countries. And on that note, I will now move on to inviting my speakers, Harriet and Ruby, to maybe talk a little bit about why they chose to be independent publishers to begin with. So, Ruby, would you like to start, or Harriet? Up, please.
Johar, everyone. Greetings. Not everything starts with an idea. Some start with tipping points, and that is the story of Adivaani. Adi is first, primal, or initial, and Vani is voices. That is the name of my publishing house, Adivaani. And it is a publishing house, a cultural documentarian center for indigenous peoples of India, and also trying to build alliances with indigenous peoples all over the world. What prompted me then was this, reaching a threshold in my lived experience of exclusion and discrimination, and that coming to its head on that particular time in my life when I realized enough is enough. And it just so happened to be at a publishing course that I was at. And I said, where are our people? Why is it that my sisters and I, who were able to have this city-bred upbringing and formal education quite circumstantially, when we went into spaces, we were the only Adivasis. So that was something I encountered in that space again. in a publishing course, where were our voices, where were our books, our literature? And I realized and recognized very quickly that even though we wrote, and we have a shorter writing history, but we still wrote, and we wrote in our native languages, we wrote in the regional dominant languages that we were educated in, yet it was not good enough to be paid attention to. And I recognized that if it was not English, no one would pay us attention. And that's when I decided, whether we speak it or not, whether we know it or not, if English is what it takes to be counted, that's what I'm going to publish in. So that's how it started. I didn't know how I was going to do it and when, but that was the moment and that was the tipping point. And to just round this off, the reason I do what I do is to answer one question. How will we recognize we are indigenous? How will we recognize we're Adivasi when everything that makes us so is taken away from us, lost or destroyed? And to answer that question, Adivaani was born.
Thank you, Ruby, for that. Harriet?
Yeah, I think Ruby's incredible. Like, I'm in complete awe of the work she does. So my answer's not quite as noble. I should say that I didn't actually start Dead Ink Books. It was started in 2016 by someone called Nathan Connolly, but I was the first employee in 2022. He'd been doing it on his own for a long time. So I've been there for a few years, and now I'm the senior commissioning editor, as mentioned. So I'm doing a majority of the acquisitions, all of the editorial, all of the production, so I'm very involved, and I absolutely love it. And that's kind of leads into what I love about indies, that we do get to be involved in the process throughout. I'm a little bit of a control freak, and I know that if I worked at a big publisher, I'd have to, I'd buy a book that I was so in love with, and I'd nurture it, and then I'd have to hand it off and have no say, and that's just not something I ever wanted to do. People at bigger publishers often think that working at an independent publisher is like a stepping stone. They assume that I'm doing this till I can get a job at Penguin, and that's never been the place I came from. I always wanted to work at an indie. I'm not a corporate person. I like small companies, and I like that indies are often value-driven, that we're given the space to be political. We're not told, you can't say this about this person because you'll upset, a sponsor or a partner. And working at an independent where, me and my colleagues, we do share values, and we do really have a lot of conversations about what we can be doing to, move in the direction and hit the goals and help the people we want to. So yeah, that's why I work at an indie and why I always wanted to.
Right. Well, I'd love to know, why do you think indies are important? I know, Harriet, you've sort of touched upon it in when you talked about why you're doing what you're doing. But just a quick few thoughts on...
Sure. So something that I hear all the time from the indies, but also the big publishers, is that indies seem to be there to take the risks that the big publishers don't. We often will take on a book that has been turned down by everyone, and we'll publish it, and it'll be really successful. And then a bigger publisher will come and buy the author's next book, which is just the game, I guess. But it's like indies are there and able to take these risks, where the bigger publishers are completely beholden to, if they don't have evidence that something's worked before, if something's too experimental, if something's too political, they just don't want to touch it. So I'm really glad that we're there to be able to offer that. Yeah.
Sure. Ruby, your thoughts on...
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the term indie is very flattering, but I don't think I would call myself an indie. I would call myself a dependee, because there's so much I have to depend on to actually keep myself going. So to be someone who holds this niche space is not really easy. So even if I say that I'm part of the publishing ecosystem, you can be included and still be in the margins, and that's really where I position myself. So we need allies, and my work has been in circulation and has been supported only through solidarities and allyships. Because even if you look at my model of working, it is a deviation from what the traditional ways are. I've had to customize a lot. So for example, when it comes to royalty, I don't pay my authors in money or any monetary terms because I can't. I pay them in books instead. So if royalty is 10%, I give them 10% of the books. Those books are for them to have, to sell, to give away, and that's completely up to them. But then my authors also don't request for anything more than that transaction, because for them it's just about getting the word out and just joining what we call, a movement of resurgence. So everyone's contributing to that. So we don't really care about the fiscals and the revenues. I know that's important, and that's why we continue to struggle. But in that, being a dependee is actually the way our model works. And I still love to be called an indie, but I would love to correct that and say, without the support of our printers in Calcutta, who very generously gave us a pay when you can, which enabled to publish the kind of books we did in the succession we were able to. But a pay when you can also means you have to actually pay at some point. And then that becomes the trap. So we are dependent on allyships like our Adivasi authors. And when I talk about this kind of a model, most people, kind of say that my work is frivolous because, I don't take or honor that kind of intellectual labor. But it's quite the opposite. What we do is what we want to do, because finally, with our entry into formal education, not only are we able to write, we are actually able to read what has been written about us. And one of the reasons to do what we do and be able to mark our presence as indies is to actually counter what has been written about us. So that's what indies can possibly do, and perhaps that's not really a business model that traditional publishers would necessarily look at. So we have a mission. It sounds very cliched, but yes, those are the ways in which we operate.
No, thank you. I think, one of the unique... Yes. And I think the unique community model of publishing, which you sort of just talked about, really stood out in your overall publishing, enterprise to me. Harriet, at that note, I'd like to actually like to hear a bit more on, your fixation about horror, because that's something that stood out about your work to me. And if you could share a little bit on that with us, please. Thank you.
Sure. So I always say that Dead Ink isn't a horror publisher. We just publish a lot of horror because that is our taste. We don't do one specific genre. What ties our books together is we look for books that are kind of daring or bold or transgressive in some way, and that often does end in horror. I think when people hear that I publish a lot of horror and that I love horror films, I love horror books, they assume that I might, that I'm fearless in some way, which is the opposite. I'm an incredibly anxious person. But I think that whether we like it or not, there is darkness in the world, and I think that arts, whether that's books or films or even video games, gives us this safe space to engage with darkness. I don't think that escapism just has to mean makes you feel like you're on a beach or in a magical world. I think escapism can give you the space to explore dark themes. And also a lot of horror, if you look at, say, a monster story or a zombie story, a lot of horror is not actually about that. They deal with quite complex themes. Horror can be this vehicle to explore difficult subjects. A lot of folk horror is about grief. Frankenstein is about prejudice. There's an excellent film called His House, which is about the refugee experience, one of the best depictions I've ever seen in the arts. And one of our most successful books, which is a literary horror and quite gruesome on some levels, is about grief, and I'll be talking about that, I think, a bit later, so I'll leave it there.
Perfect. Thank you. Ruby and Harriet, would you like to share a work that you were very proud of and talk us through a little bit about the designing, the editorial, and the marketing, the entire perspective on that project, just touching upon these broad themes?
So the book I just mentioned, which I have brought with, because I like to do a little show and tell. So this is Monstrillo by Gerardo Sámano Cordova. I'm super proud of this book. It was a book that we did not publish originally. It was published by a US publisher called Zando. When we found out about it, it had been out for a couple of years, and something that's quite common in the UK publishing industry is that publishers will not touch a book if it's already come out, and in the US publishing industry. So it had come out, it had become a bit of a cult hit in the US, but no UK publisher wanted to publish it because it wasn't new. And I heard about it, and I was very excited about it, and I asked to see it, and I read it, and I was just blown away by how beautiful it is. So as I mentioned, it's a little bit gruesome. It's about a woman whose son dies, and she cuts out a piece of his lung, and she puts it in a jar, and it grows into a carnivorous little monster, which they name Monstrilio. Which, yeah, it sounds like that's going to be, a horrible monster story, but it's honestly one of the most beautiful depictions of grief I've ever seen in fiction. It's absolutely incredible. It's set across Mexico City, across Brooklyn, Berlin. So it's this really global story. Each chapter is from a different perspective, so you really get the whole angle. Every character in it is queer, but that's never brought up. That's not a plot point, that's just how the world is. So we published this, and it just had the most incredible response. We struggled to get any mainstream publicity, because that is a challenge that indies have. But from just social media, it was blowing up. People were so excited about it. We're also very design focused at Dead Ink. We work with some incredible freelance designers. So the designer came up with this design, very minimalist, very fun. It's just got, a depiction of the monster on, and that was very popular. So we were proud to, publish something so eye-catching. Because of the design, our sales and marketing coordinator, Becky, who's brilliant, came up with the idea that she could take the image from the cover, she could edit it out, and then she could edit it into different pictures. So we also have a independent bookshop in Liverpool. So she was posting on social media pictures of our bookshop with Monstrilio, with captions like, "Monstrilio's here eating all the books, can someone come and get him?" And that proved really popular, people really enjoyed it. So we reached out to some branches of Waterstones that we're friendly with and asked if they wanted to do it, and they did as well. So they were posting pictures of Monstrilio in their shops. And then on release, the bookshops really got behind it because of that marketing push, because it already had that the excitement around it. And since then, sales have just been incredible. I think it's going to become one of our bestsellers, beating another book that won a major prize, just because people will not stop buying it. It was in the horror charts for a long time. There was almost a whole year where anytime you went on Waterstones and clicked on the horror section, it would be at the top on the bestsellers between Stephen King and Dracula. So yeah, I'm so proud of this book, knowing that, it was a risk. It had been out for a while. No one else wanted to touch it. It's weird, but it's brilliant, and I'm so glad we published it.
Lovely. Thank you. Obviously, it's some very clever design and publishing, marketing that sort of backed the books. So, Ruby, would you like to talk about a project that you'd like to share with everybody here?
Yeah. I'm very proud of all the books we put out, because it is this process of co-creation. It's not like we get ready manuscripts. I meet someone, perhaps, when I go for field work or whatever it be, and I'm like, we should publish your stories. And whenever I meet Adivasis, there's one of two things that they tell me. One is that we don't know how to write, and I'm like, that's not a problem, we can write this together. And the second is, we have no stories. And that is really heartbreaking, because I'm like, your life stories are stories worth telling, worth putting out. And navigating that space has been very, very interesting. But the story that I want to tell you is about our children's books. And we probably can tell from my retelling of Adivaani's, Genesis story, where stories come from, but I want to talk about where do stories go. And sometimes, as I have witnessed, they take on a life of their own, and what does that mean? So when we decided to do the Santal creation stories, in fact, when I started Adivaani, I knew it had to be done. I was like, yes, it needs a name. So I sat in that publishing course, not paying attention to what was going on, but I was like playing around with words, and then Adivaani came up, and I was like, I will need support, which is why it had to be a registered trust. All of that was there, but we had no books. And I was like, where do I get these stories from? Where do I get these books from? And then my friends started telling me, like, look around you. I'm like, I don't know, there's nothing around me. Look closer. So then I go home, and then I quickly see that, oh, perhaps there is something happening at home as well, because my father was part of this kind of cultural revolution in Calcutta, where the first generation of Adivasis who moved to the city wanted to remain connected to their culture and their language, and they began a newsletter. My father was a theologian. I mean, my history is also part of this Christian colonization and all of that. So my father was a pastor and a theologian. But his doctoral thesis was on the comparison of the biblical creation tradition and the Santal creation tradition. And I hadn't cared to read the book until now. Yeah. It was 2012, and Adivaani, the idea had come. And he was going to republish it because it was published by someone else and very poorly done, and it was like typeset very badly. And he was going to do it himself again, like most indigenous publishing, which is self-publication. And I said, give it to me. So when I began to read the book, that was the first time I encountered the Santal creation story. Up until then, the only creation story I was aware of was of Adam and Eve. And I felt like a large part of my ancestry, my identity, was missing or had been taken away from me because I didn't know that part of me. But I was also a descendant of the Geese, from whose eggs the first Santal people were born. And that's when I decided that I had to do a version of this book. And I realized, like, what's happening in our villages, you know, the art of storytelling, the orality and the oral art of storytelling was soon disappearing because our time and relationship to time had changed because our agricultural lands were taken away by stone quarry mining, and every able-bodied person from age 9 to 70 had to work in those stone quarry mines. So where was the time to sing, dance, tell those stories? And I was like, if I, with this kind of access, didn't have these stories, imagine what is happening there. So these stories had to be captured. And that's when we decided to do some of the creation stories, and I broke the long narration into 3, and I recast those stories. And one was called We Come from the Geese, and the other is Earth Rests on a Tortoise, because that is our belief. And the third part, in 13 years, I still haven't been able to bring out, which is how the community grew. And in that, we put very simple English words, and I was also thinking before the Adivaani idea that what enabled my sister and me to access these spaces, and it was this ability to speak in this language that was relatable, the language that allowed you access and a seat at the table. So I wanted to teach my people English. I said I didn't want to start a school, but why shouldn't we all have this language? Not that I'm advocating for English over Santali or any of our other languages, but why don't we also have this? I speak fluent Santali. And in that, these books came about, and I was like, this could also be that entry point for them to access this language that has become so important. And when I realized that how then are my people going to read or have access to these books, with the distribution centers at that point not very friendly to having my books with them, because they would listen to what I had, and I would say, oh, Adivasi books. And they would say, oh, they're not good and we're not interested. And some people also told me, but why don't you just say, you know, it's history or it's art or it's culture? But I said, why can I not just say Adivasi books, and why would people be still averse to picking them up? So those were the initial struggles. But nevertheless, sorry, this is taking too long.
Go on, please.
So I decided then to take my books to some of the important fairs and commemorations of our peoples, and one is this very big revolt and a commemoration of that. So the revolt of 1855 against the British, but actually it was against the mainstream Indian landlords and their agents, who came into our lands and began to really create havoc. So it was this kind of rebellion or revolt against them, and then the British had to get involved because the zamindars or the landlords said, you know, you brought us in, now we can't fight these people, you come in. And so it became this battle of guns and cannons and bows and arrows. And of course we know how that ended. 30,000 Santals died. Of course we lost the war. But we remember that rebellion, and every year on 30th of June we have a big celebration. So I decided to take my books there, and there it's beautiful, you know, so the music's playing, our traditional drums are there, people come dressed in the Panchi Parhand. I should have worn one today, but I didn't. And clearly you can see so many of them do not read and write. But they came to our stall, they came to my stall, and there was one man who picked up one of our textual books, and he held it upside down, and he flipped from one page to the other, and he said, "These are beautiful. They feel so beautiful." And I realized what we were producing, or what we were accustomed to producing, was like inexpensive photocopied version of books. That's what it looked like. But there they were being produced and being consumed, so to say, and they were being sold in our fairs alongside your rice and meat and everything. And then I realized why, you know, like my people deserve that care, you know, so I was so happy with that compliment, even if he couldn't read any of the words in there. Then it came to the children's books. So I had the creation stories, but I also had a book for the rebellion. And then everyone who came, all I had to tell them is, this is the story of our creation, and this is the story of our rebellion. And then they went from one page to the other, retelling the story of our creation, of the rebellion to me from memory. They needn't need to have known how to read. Those words didn't matter. Over there we connected as people with the same ancestry, with the same stories. And that's when I realized what imagery and what memory does. And when books are supposed to be those objects of text, and those words are supposed to mean something, in that moment it transcended all of that, and those images became what would become reading material, meaning-making material. What then do you make of books? What then are books? And that was like such a humbling experience. So for me, that is what happens. That is what I do. And that's when I realized this makes sense. What I'm doing makes sense. And then, despite the struggles, and that's one of the reasons I keep going. Yeah.
Thank you, Ruby. It's always, fascinating for me to hear about your work, and more power to you, because I think it's very important that stories get, told, and they spread beyond our big cities and whatever else. Which also brings me to my next question, which is, you're based in Kolkata, Ruby. Harriet, you're in Liverpool. And I wonder, this is outside of the big publishing circuits of London and New Delhi and Mumbai. I would love to hear from you on how does that impact your publishing, your challenges, probably your advantages of being in cities outside of big metros, Thank you.
So the UK publishing industry is very London-centric. I know that the UK is a lot smaller than India, but it still does mean that there are a lot of issues.
Able to sustain myself anywhere else. And Calcutta is a metro city, but it's one of the most affordable ones. Plus, I'm familiar with it. But it's also very close to where I'm from. It's like 3 or 4 hours by the fastest train. So I also needed to be close to where my roots are for me to remain grounded and anchored. So it just became where I could work and remended in so many ways in that place. And it's as close I can get to my roots. Yeah.
So before we invite the questions from the audience, I just had one last question. What's brewing in the pot? And what would you hope to achieve through this fellowship? If you could share a little bit of that.
I mean, this fellowship opportunity is incredible for us. The Dead Ink, the publisher, like we can't afford this kind of thing. And often opportunities that are available, the country that runs them, they just want to bring over the person that's going to, be the most benefit for the country, which is probably going to be the highest editor at the biggest imprint of, one of the big 5 publishers. So the fact that this was open specifically to independent publishers is just amazing. And getting to be here is an opportunity that I just would not have without this fellowship. So I'm very, very grateful. The main thing that I guess I came here for was just to learn about a different industry, that, and to meet the Indian readers and to learn all about it and to form contacts. And I've had some incredible meetings with agents and with publishers. And then, I would absolutely love if I left here with maybe an Indian horror novel that I could buy the rights to and publish, or not just horror. I'm actively looking for books, and it's to get to come here and just have access to all these professionals who I've spoken to so many who have books that just sound so right for us, and it's just really bridged that gap. And I'm also having the opportunity to tell these publishers about our titles and maybe get this international reach. So it's really this great all-round experience that I'm just very excited about.
Ruby, what about you?
Yeah. So I'm a publisher who hasn't published in 7 years. And I often question whether I can still call myself a publisher. And I say yes because of 2 things. One is it's absolutely possible to have a publishing house running on a backlist, and that my books are still in demand despite not being available in so many centers is testimony to the importance of the work I've done. I entered a vacuum, and when I realized for a lot of reasons that I had to kind of step out, I left a vacuum. In the 13 years, I would say 13 chronological years that I have been around, I would have liked for another publishing house, Adivasi publishing house, to be doing the same thing, either in competition or to kind of add to the ecosystem, but that hasn't happened. And then I'm so worried because a lot of people tell me, like, when are you going to, what are you doing, what's happening, when are you going to restart? Because if you're not doing it, then no one else is, and your books and whatever you've done has been so important for us. And I'm really worried about this huge responsibility, but I'm also worried about this gap. Why aren't there any more? And the second thing is, yes, I still call myself a publisher because I keep the discourse alive. The work of a publisher is not just to bring the books out, but to keep them relevant and in circulation. And one of the tasks I do is to do that, keep the discourse of indigeneity alive through talks and other avenues of writing, attending conferences, etc., etc. And when I saw the announcement for this on a WhatsApp group for Indian women publishers, I was first very ashamed to apply because I was thinking, I've been around for 13 years, and what do I really have to show for it? Because if you look at other independent presses, their lists or whatever, they would have looked so very different. But then I was like, who am I competing against? There's no one. Everyone's trajectory is so very different. And for me to apply then meant I was ready to reinsert myself in this industry in some ways, and you all embraced me and allowed me to have the courage to re-enter and find ways to revive what I have been doing. So in many ways, my publishing is not just about bringing out books, but keeping the discourse alive, and I have been doing that. So this opportunity allows me to do that as well.
We'd be very happy to take questions from the audience if there were any. Sure.
Hi, my name is Srishti and I'm an independent freelance editor. My question is specifically for Harriet, and also if you feel it's applicable, then you can feel free to answer, Ruby. I'm not aware if what your thoughts are on this. So yesterday, in a very brief conversation I had with you, I found out that Dead End Books is committed to not using AI in your publishing process. So I wanted to know your perspective behind this choice and your process to ensure that you have an AI-free publishing experience for your writers.
It's quite a complex topic, and I feel like in my echo chamber back at home, it's obvious, you know, we're just not interested, and then we come out in the world and everyone seems to really be getting on board. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is just that we're quite environmentally focused, and I just don't see why we would start doing something that's damaging to the environment when we haven't needed it before. But I recognize that it can make a lot of things easier. I understand why people are using it for some aspects. In terms of actually using it in the creation of content or editing, just like personally myself as a reader, but also the books we want to publish, I think that, you know, reading, whatever you're reading, whether you're reading romantasy or a non-fiction book or a gruesome horror novel, it's all about learning about the human experience. I think every book that people read, they are learning something about being human, and I just don't have any interest in taking the humanity out of that. I don't think currently that AI is ever going to understand nuance or subtext or misunderstandings or just, you know, there's so many great works of literature where all they do is talk around the subject, but as readers who live in the world, we can read that and we can know what it's about and we can relate. And I'm just not interested in bringing in, you know, a new angle that takes that away. So yeah, that's why that's important to us. Thanks.
And I also had the second part of the question, like what process do you have to ensure that, you know, AI manuscripts does not get in?
I'm afraid I don't have a great answer for this. It's something that we are currently struggling with. I mean, we only currently take submissions from agents, although we will be doing an open submission at some point in the future, which we'll post that on social media, because I know someone's going to ask me about that afterwards. But yeah, that's something we have talked about. Like, we're going to have to find a way of checking that it's not AI. So yeah.
Hi. You touched on this a little bit, but what makes a good publisher for both of you?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it would depend who you were asking. I mean, I personally don't like that often when I do have to talk about our successes, it does come down to, you know, we're always going to start talking about sales, but that just comes down to the fact that that's how we survive. You know, we are... I should have mentioned this earlier, but we're entirely Arts Council funded, and outside of that, you know, we need our books to be selling. So I guess a good publisher is somebody who is publishing books that people are going to want. But I think that we shouldn't forget how much of a privilege it is to have a platform. We take it for granted. You know, most people in their lives will never be in a position where they can discover a piece of art and actually get to share that with more people. So I guess a good publisher is also responsible in what they're putting out there and using their position for good. Got away from me a bit.
Ruby, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said, but I think my experience has taught me about how you honor and defend your authors, because that has been something, I mean, one of the other things in addition to what she said, because that has been my experience with some of our writing. So everyone wants a free book to review, but our books are never reviewed. And one of the books that came back was a book from an activist who writes who has only learned English in the last 5 years of his adulthood. He writes in Hindi, and Facebook is full of his posts. Journalists pick up his story without really giving him any credit. And that's when I decided to get in touch with him and say, you know, let's do a collection of some of this and let it be like this. Adivasi 101, understanding what Naxalism is, what the Red Corridor is, and what is all of that, and what does crossfire mean, being stuck between the government and the police and the military. So in that, his writing, so short pieces, an anthology of all of his writing from the ground, came out, a very popular book, out of print. But I sent it to a reviewer who asked for it, and the note that came back was, his English is very blog-like, very simple. And I didn't understand why that was a problem. So I wrote back saying, but it doesn't take away from the efficacy of the stories. You still understand what's being said, right? And then I realized that, one, I had to defend the English of my writers. And there had to be a certain erudite standard that people were expecting. Now, as a publisher and his editor, I could have changed that language to make it suitable or more palatable, but then that would not be him anymore, that would be me. So what then is my loyalty to my authors and his authorship? And in that, it was a very upsetting experience for me, because here I was having to, again, encounter this arrogance of language syndrome, and then this particular, not just English, but this particular kind of English. And Gladson, the author, speaks a certain way, and he writes the exact same way. And people who know how he speaks, and when he does, like rooms are filled with people, they would know this is his voice. So in that, I think one of the important things is how to retain the voice of the person, but also how to defend your work, your authors. That's really important. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruby. We have a lady in the third row. I think she has a question.
Harriet, Ruby, first of all, congratulations for this fellowship. And by the talks, we realize that it's very well deserved. And my question is that, have you found any common ground between this cross-country collaboration when it comes to any roadblocks, struggles, and triumphs, or anything in between? Any common aspects or compatible aspects?
I mean, on one hand, we're very different, I'm sure everyone will have realized, but on the other hand, I'm so happy that I have been paired with Ruby. I feel like it's been such an amazing match. We are aligned on so much, whether that's, I mean, I think we have a lot of the same political views, and she's just fab. I really like her. So, yeah, we do have a lot of the same struggles, I guess, in publishing, even though they're on different scales, because in the end it's always going to be us up against the big guys, us unable to get the review space, us fighting to get our books into the retailers. So yeah, I mean, there's always similarities. I feel like the gap between both of us, I feel like the gap between Dead Ink and, a Big Five publisher is bigger than the gap between both of us.
Ruby, your thoughts on that?
Since speaking to her, I mean, I do realize even though they are a small team of 5, they are organized in certain ways which allow them to operate in what would be more traditional ways, but their challenges are actually quite like mine. So even though I single-handedly work, and I use we because indigenous peoples use the inclusive way of speaking, but I would say like the challenges are similar. And one of the things that I have picked up from our talks and what she hasn't mentioned is, like, while we focus on the fiscal, I think for us, when we do it, I don't look at it as a loss of revenue so much as a loss of circulation when we are unable to have our books out there. And the loss of circulation is so much bigger of a problem for me. How do the works that we've put out get to the people they should be getting out to? And I think that's similar for you as well.
Yeah,
so then
definitely.
This is something I've always struggled with, what is loss of revenue versus loss of circulation, and how this is so much more important for me. So the struggles of small publishers.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Harriet. Thank you, Ruby. On that note, wishing you all the best. as part of the India-UK Publishing Fellowship. I hope it's an enriching experience. And we at British Council look forward to being in touch and hearing how this journey all pans out. So good luck. Thank you. And thank you,
Thanks,
JVM,
everyone.
for having us on.